Cool. So let's go briefly point by point on what we want to talk today. Scott, Scott, you're architect at TIBCO, right? Correct me if I'm mistaken. Okay. Cool. So Scott has two review issues he wants to talk about, and one, it's called, the title is "An app is not an API in EDA, event-driven architectures," which actually is the issue is something different, I guess, right? From the explanation it's not so much about the term.
I had trouble coming up with the title. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. And then the server's semantics. So we'll talk about it later as well. And also, Lucas and I wanted to, as part of the Lucas review from SAP, is about the application ID, that it should not be mandatory, and it's actually something that I also wanted to ask you how you see it. So we'll talk about it later. Also, would like to communicate to all of you the dates for when are we closing the time for reviews and all this stuff, and when are we launching the version 2, and then Q&A if you have something to. I mean, Q&A doesn't have to be at the end. As long as you have questions, just interrupt. Let's make it a nice chat, not just a structured, right, talk or anything. So Scott, do you want to start with an app is not an API in EDA, maybe?
Okay, sure. So it kind of boils down to the way that I've been thinking about dealing with events sort of as APIs, and in some of our internal work. And so AsyncAPI Spec I found very appealing in terms of it was timely. When I found out about it, it documents pretty much what I want to document. The only challenge I saw was, I'm really trying to the way I see it is generally with a hub sub architecture or event driven architecture. The event stream itself sort of is the API. Right, so it's not like a usual provider-consumer sort of arrangement that we have with REST, because obviously you can have many publishers, you can have many subscribers, and in a sense, I want to be careful with the term application because I know it has a very precise meaning in the spec. But let's say solution, the solution that you build around this event bus is a single cooperating solution. And the event bus serves a very central role there. So I'm really just trying to give it that central role, really. So I think AsyncAPI, if we allow basically the omission of either publish or subscribe, it does exactly what I want, which is to say, what are the messages that are flowing and where are they flowing? So that's sort of it in a nutshell. I was a bit more verbose in the review description.
I've seen something in your review. You said self-documenting channels, so that you could have an option like instead of having publish and subscribe as a verb, you have it. You have another property called role, maybe, which can be publish, subscribe, or missing. So in case it's missing, you said it's a self-documenting channel. But the context in the whole document is the application. So that's what I don't get. If we do this, if we just don't specify role, what does it really mean? Like,
at that point, the application is in some of the samples that I was writing up when I was working on this review. I even changed the title and the ID to really you're changing the focus. The application isn't, unless you're talking about the larger thing, the solution that's composed of many different cooperating processes, right? This is, you're documenting an events channel or an event stream, or call it what you will. So that's the sense that the idea that I still need an application ID is maybe less critical. The idea that I'm talking even about an application, the point is I'm not talking about any single application. I'm talking about, the way all of the applications communicate.
Okay.
For this particular.
So your concern is because you want to document the whole, let's say, the whole architecture.
Yeah.
You probably have one single document for the whole architecture.
Or I may have many, but this is one piece of the documentation for the whole architecture.
Yeah, you may have many, but you simplifying it a lot, like it would be possible to have just one documenting the whole thing, right?
Yeah, and it's actually more than just documentation. So, and I think I mentioned this in the review. You can imagine implementations of publishers and subscribers that are aware of AsyncAPI, or this means of configuring them, and maybe they don't support all the possible, they obviously can't support all the possible extensions for different kinds of servers and protocols, etc. But they may support a few. And so essentially you've got configurable code, and this could serve as actually the live configuration that's driving the design time experience or the runtime experience or whatever. So it's hopefully it's more than just documentation.
Mm-hmm. So this is something that that we tried on version 1 to have a single document and document the channels. And actually in version 1, the document was not representing the application. It wasn't specified, so you could use a document to document whatever you want. And I tried this approach, like documented the whole thing with a single document or in a single place, right? But then a problem arose that I didn't think about, and it was that imagine, say you have an AsyncAPI file that actually represents a broker, maybe, if you want to call it like this, it represents a broker, and you want to generate code for a single application, for a single service in a microservices architecture, for instance. Then you don't have context of which application is actually subscribing or publishing to a certain channel. And you only have the list of channels, and you have publish and subscribe in all of them, because every channel will have someone publishing and someone subscribing at least, right?
Right. Well, I think that there may be a difference, Fran, in that I'm not trying to document the entire solution. I'm trying to document one channel communication, right?
Okay. Okay. So,
right. So it really is the scope of the AsyncAPI doc really does focus down. So I wouldn't expect to use multiple servers. I wouldn't expect to see multiple channels. I actually had a version of this where I did sort of more violent change to the spec, and I figured that's probably not appropriate at this stage. So I ended up saying, well, let me make sure I can do what the key thing that I need to do, which is to eliminate the requirement to say publish or subscribe.
Okay.
And even that, I mentioned this in other thoughts. I can always work around this simply by putting in publisher always or something like that, and just so it's really about making the syntax work for me for the use case I have in mind.
Well, hopefully you don't have to do that. The thing is, one of the things that we were thinking for version 2 or post version 2 is actually having separate specs, mini specs, that can act as or can function as libraries of parts of an AsyncAPI specification. It was meant initially for schemas and for messages, but it might make sense to have libraries of channels, like a separate document where you document all the channels, only document the channels. Like, and this is the message that's going to be flowing in this channel. I don't know if it's going to be published and subscribed. I don't care about the verb, right? Just channel name, and immediately inside you see the message definition. maybe it's a good idea to put it there as a separate spec or mini spec that then the AsyncAPI spec can reference this library file, right? So for instance,
I honestly, that's fine. That's a reasonable approach.
I'm saying this because then we tend to think on broker-centric architectures, but then that's not always the case. So for instance, we have also client server with WebSockets, for instance, and with HTTP streaming APIs, for instance, like you request and leave the connection open, and you start receiving servers and events. So in this case, the channel is just one, right? It's just or well, not necessarily the channel. In the case of WebSocket, yes, you only have one channel. In the case of API HTTP streaming APIs, you can have many, which are a mapping of the paths, right? So that's why I'm trying to so actually I think I have the diagram here because when I was deciding where to put the focus on, I remember having it here, right? You have it this, like I was thinking on, let me have a look because I don't remember. So topics, processes, and messages. And everything was, the relationship between the three of them is a many-to-many, right? And I thought, okay, because I had the same thought, like, what if we put the focus on the topic, on the channel, right? And then we document everything around it. Yeah, but then it looks awkward for client-server architectures and
I understand that. I didn't talk about WebSockets, etc., because I don't have enough knowledge of how you're trying to apply AsyncAPI there.
So I came up with the idea of keeping it as focusing on the application, because it's for two reasons. It's easier for people coming from OpenAPI, like your mindset is on the application, let's say, or on the process, right? And also because then you can augment it with many other features, like how to deploy the application with XDAS, whatever. I know this is not part of the spec, but many people are actually using it for this. Like they want to define what the application publishes and subscribe, and also how to I don't know, where's the GitHub repo, how to deploy it, whatever information about the CI/CD pipeline, because it's a single application. But people think about, okay, let's put everything here. So it has more use cases, right? This single file could have more use cases, even though it's not about APIs anymore, because it's about deploying and CI/CD and all this stuff that doesn't make so much sense on the AsyncAPI spec, right? But that's why we have the extensions, so people can actually do these kind of things, right? So I think, I don't know what you guys think. Having this idea of a separate document that's actually a library. This was actually proposed by MuleSoft guys, because in RAML you have the concept of RAML libraries. So you can move certain pieces and make them reusable, right?
Actually, I'll tell you, when I was looking through the getting started, you make reference to the shared messages, right?
Yeah.
Using a ref to link to the message, but of course, with the perspective I have, what stood out to me was that the channel and the server were still redundant in both the publisher and the server.
Correct.
And really, with this perspective, you end up with virtually nothing but identity. And you have a name, an ID, and a description, and you say I'm a publisher, and everything else is a reference. right? If you go as far, I actually went through, okay, what if I made the server a ref, and I checked the spec. Can I make all of these 3 things refs? And then I said, why am I making 3 things a ref? I just want a ref to one thing.
Yeah. Well, actually, sorry, go.
Yeah. So the point is, if you're using async API in the way I'm intending to, you may not use it at all for the applications, because there's almost nothing there, right? You might generate code for the applications. You might generate subscriber code. You might generate publisher code. And that just becomes an argument when you take in the document and say, what am I generating, right? So it's I think the lesson for me is, as you talk about the deployment approach and the things that people want to do with the spec, as in specifying this, you want to sort of stay fairly agnostic about the semantics in many ways, right? Because I'm not going to use it for deployment, certainly, and I wouldn't thank you if you put deployment semantics into it, right? So it's a bit of a tightrope to walk, I know.
I know what you mean. Yeah, the thing is, I don't want to put, just to be clear, I don't want to put, for instance, deployment semantics on the spec, because I understand that this is not API. This is part of the application of the life cycle and all stuff, right? But people use these XDAS extensions to put information there. That's what I would say. So probably, the concern is that every application then will have the same set of, not the same, but a list of topics or channels, sorry. And you don't want to be repeating all the time the same things, right?
Yeah.
This reminds me to traits, to the traits feature that we added in version 2, which is not possible to use it on channels at channel level. But maybe we should make it possible to specify a trait, a reusable piece somewhere else, which is a list of channels, right? And then reference it from the channel list. I don't know. We'll have to think about it, but maybe.
No, I'm not going to try to box you into a corner here, Fran. Like, as I said, if essentially I brought these concerns to Raji, just in terms of an internal TIBCO perspective, and could we use it and so forth. And she suggested that I share them. So it's all up to you, and we're not gonna throw down our toys and stomp out if you don't do it. And honestly, in our use, we probably wouldn't even have an async API doc for the applications, right? Because so whether or not we can reference from there to the central thing, we're really gonna have our own artifacts that are referencing this as a configuration artifact. Right?
Yeah, that's another common use case that I find, like people telling me our source of truth is not gonna be the async API file; it's gonna be something else. Our own custom internal format or something.
Right. So as far as I'm concerned, where you go with this is totally up to you, and we can.
Yeah. But I know, but I want to, I want to get feedback from you folks and get opinion and so it's not just a one-man show, right? Saying, hey, this now. I want to be as open as possible and whenever something makes sense, why not? Right, I do lots of mistakes all the time, so please correct me if I'm doing something bad. So moving forward, maybe to the server's semantics, maybe it's something similar. It's a similar concern. So, okay.
Yeah, Sure, this is just a simpler thing, and it may end up just being wanting to change the wording in the getting started document. I think it's related to that notion of using these assets as deployment artifacts, which was something that didn't occur to me. So the idea of saying, well, I need to put multiple servers in there because I'm going to document my my different deployment environments. That really didn't ring true for me. So I just wanted to provide that feedback. I'm sort of wrestling with, the reason Swagger has succeeded. It's got an easier time, quite honestly, right? Because there's a clear orientation. There's an API provider and an API consumer.
Yeah.
And it's very clear what you can do with a Swagger, right? And if it's got enough information, you can use it and generate code or drive code and hook up to that server and start interacting, right? It's a little bit more challenging to get that character in an event-driven world because these brokers aren't always open to the internet and various reasons. So that was just really it. I struggled with what is this really going to mean if you, Fran, hand me your API doc and I'm supposed to now interact with that, right? Yeah. Is it useful for me to have your QA and your dev, et cetera? No, if I would expect to have, if I were a dev engineer, I'd get one version. If I were a production engineer, I'd get the live production version, and it would only have one server, and I don't have to figure out which one to use.
But then when it's about generating code, for instance, and this is something that I already suffered, and this is true. You were right. When you want to generate code from an AsyncAPI file, you have to choose which server you want to generate it for, right? Or at least you need to be clear on what every server means, like, because one is development, the other one is staging, and the other one is production, for instance, right? But some other people might list 3 different brokers with 3 different zones, and they are all production, for instance.
Yes. Yeah.
Semantics on the servers are not clear. That's true.
Yeah.
There's no way to know this is going to be development, this is staging, this is production.
And maybe they can be. I don't know. That's
yeah. The thing is, the reason that they are an array for there are 2 reasons. It's just to make it the same as an open API, so things are reusable or more or less reusable, which might not make more sense anymore. Sorry. Because the server object is already different. So yeah, we'll have to check this. And also because when generating documentation, you might want to have the 3 servers listed in your Markdown or in your HTML. Like, hey, this is because you can have a description, right? This is a development server. This is a staging server. This is a production server or broker or whatever it is, right? So yeah, but yes, it's a pain in the ass when you're generating code, having to specify which broker you want to connect to or which server you want to do, right? Otherwise, and when you're generating this is fine, but for instance, when you're using it as part of an SDK, like you said, for instance, you hook it up into a server, you hook the AsyncAPI file into a server or into an application that will auto-configure itself from the AsyncAPI file. Then you have to select one of the...
Well, I suspect, again, in those use cases, in those uses, you won't have multiple servers anyway, right?
Yeah.
The files will be in alignment with the use case, whoever's using it. So I think this, in many ways, this review is kind of working at odds with my earlier review, because my earlier review is arguing that, don't be too opinionated about the semantics of AsyncAPI with an application focus. And this one is saying, well, if you're going to be opinionated, then the server semantics are weird. So again, I just wanted to provide the feedback. I think I agree with you in any case that multiple servers are necessary. Again, in the spirit of the prior issue, to remain open to different semantics and different interpretations.
Actually, we got an issue like more than 1 year ago. A guy telling me if there could be a way of tagging servers to mean something. Like this is, like I was saying, this is development, staging, or production. So it actually has it there, like this is production. And also, and also have to be able to do some kind of relationship between the servers. But I thought it was really complicated to maintain.
So something else that occurred to me. I'm sorry. The generally when you're generating code, you know, you would rarely actually bind on a URL, right? You wouldn't hard code a URL into the code typically anyway. That would be late bound, injected as an environment variable or something. So, for instance, if you had 3 servers and they all had the same protocol, then you know what kind of code to generate. And anyway, the URL is abstracted out. So I wonder if that argues for a little bit more, you know, rather than having 3 servers that have the same protocol, have 1 server that has 3 URLs or, you know, something like that. I know that gets into a whole rat's nest of, you know, how do you document the configuration of this broker versus that WebSockets, et cetera. So,
yeah, I always fear of coupling to match the specification to generating code or generating documentation, or, you know, to one specific thing that you can do with the spec. Actually, I like to think of the spec as like a book, right? You read a book and you understand something, and then you can do whatever you want with this information. But at the same time, I want to think about it like, okay, it serves for a purpose at least, right? If I want to do code, I have enough information here. If I want to generate docs, I have enough information here, and same for the rest of use cases.
And I think that's the right idea. You have to let the community, you know, build their own practices around it, and maybe that will align in some particular direction, and 3.0 can be more targeted, right? But I think you have the right approach. So again, I'm not advocating for any serious change here. Unless it is more discussion of this, you know, that's maybe one thing that's missing from the collateral content around AsyncAPI is, you know, statements that you just made about you were intentionally trying to be less opinionated about, you know, the use cases for AsyncAPI.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe it will appear somewhere. I don't know. Let me just.
That's the worst kind of work, I know, when you're trying to document what you're not documenting.
So anyone has something to say? You're all very quiet today.
I've been thinking about maybe we should have some sort of actor modeling. An actor does different things, uses different servers. So an actor would use a particular server, or they would publish only, or they would subscribe to a channel. So there's no who in this document. There's no actor. That's what I've been thinking about.
But and by actor, you mean this will be, for instance, a server?
Yeah, an actor could be a server. An actor could be client. Alice.
Sorry, not server. Service. Sorry for the mistake. Service or application or process. So actually, if I understand correctly, what you mean by actor is the current focus of the spec of version 2. So the whole document represents an actor.
Just one actor, though. I'm talking about representing multiple actors within a document.
Okay, so having like a list of AsyncAPI definitions, maybe. So I don't know. I thought about something similar with APIs.json from Kinlane, and it might be interesting to have something not only for AsyncAPI, but also for REST APIs and for other kind of APIs, to have a document where you can list. So here's this application, here's this REST API, here's this event-driven application, and from there you can generate your a map of your architecture, for instance, right? With all the definition, all the data you need. I'm not sure I'm understanding correctly if I'm getting it, if it's what you mean or not. Correct me if I'm not.
Well, this could sort of be hacked onto the existing specification using the extensions. You could use extensions, for instance, to mark a publish entry as only for servers and a subscribe only for client.
Oh.
So you would have client only for a subscribe, or X server only for a publish, or something like that. Or you could also, I guess, for a server, I guess you could stick extensions there. You could have an extension that says X actor Alice or X actor Bob.
Yeah, the thing is, same thing. That will work only for client server communication, but in the case of broker, everyone is if your service is publishing and subscribing, maybe I don't know. So that the one saying that your service or your application is actually a publishing actor, let's say, it's the publish verb. So I don't know if in a broker architecture it would make many sense, but I do see what you mean. On the, for instance, on the client server model, you could have something like, yeah, this publish operation is only for clients, right? And this one is only for servers. But that kind of breaks the purpose of the spec, the context of the spec, because the context is a single application, right? So I don't know. So if you define an application, it's always going to be a server, or it's always going to be a client. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'm just saying it could be both too if you wanted it to. And well, but yeah,
depends on on the perspective. Like if you have a server application that serves a WebSocket connection, this could be the server of a front-end application, for instance, but could be the client of another server, right? Yeah, I mean this could probably. I think this is a good use case for a standardized extension that we're gonna create an extensions registry. So maybe you want to create this whenever we have it as a standard extension, and so people can use it. And depending on the use cases that we see people using it, we can probably incorporate it into the spec. Maybe it makes more sense like this, because right now I'm not sure many people will use it that way. I don't know. But yeah, it's a great idea, I think. For instance, it would be easy. It would be easier to map to create graphs of communication, because if this node is a server, is acting as a server, is acting as a client, or Anyway. Anything else you want to add before we move forward? No? You're very shy today. Cool. So, as per my conversation with Łukasz, I have to pronounce your name correctly. So I don't know, I think you all have seen that there is an ID property at the root level of the document, and it's mandatory right now. Well, I'm clear with my opinion here, but I want to know yours. I think it should not be mandatory because, and I did it. I'm going to explain why I did it mandatory in the first time. And the idea was to make it clear that the scope of the document is a single application, right, and not many. Because I saw people using the application, the document, to document many applications, and then you end up with this problem of who's subscribing and who's publishing, right? But then it's creating problems, or more. It's not exactly problems, but it's in some cases people don't really care so much about the idea of the application, and I understand. Like when in the case, I think. Łukasz can add more to that, but at Kima, Kima is a solution for Kubernetes, right? On serverless and distributed distributed event-driven architectures, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, you can probably add that before I
yeah, sure. So I can give you some context.
Right.
So how to explain Kima in just few words, but yeah, so Kima is basically, it's based on Kubernetes, and one of the most important things it tries to solve is that to enable a connectivity of old enterprise size monoliths applications into Kubernetes, so you can then extend it in any technology you want. You don't have to be locked to a technology of a given monolith. So you can have a situation that you have one Kima cluster and multiple different applications connected into it. And these applications, of course, are written in different technologies. But at the end, the most important is that they all send events to Kima, and consumer, the developer can subscribe to a specific event type with AsyncAPI 2. It's called channel now, so I need to remember about the new glossary. So that's how it was the purpose. And for us, we treat AsyncAPI rather as a for two things. So as a document describing the list of events that you have available for a given application, and then we nicely render it in the UI, of course, as a reference. But then also the document itself, the AsyncAPI doc, serves as a input. Sorry, because my kids just got back home. Uno momento.
No problem. Say hello to them.
Sorry. Going back to the other part of the AsyncAPI, so use the same document as an input. Like we grab out of it a list of channels, so the developer through a CLI or UI can easily see the list of events he can subscribe to. We also take the payload from the async from the spec that is provided for each channel. We take the payload, we display it to the consumer, so he knows how it looks like. We generate examples for him so he can test and trigger, let's say, test messages before he actually subscribes to real messages. So that's how we consume it. So we still look at it as a actually application, right? So it's a spec that describes a list of channels you get from a given application that you connect into Kima. And concluding, so for us, the ID is something that it's not needed, because we of course have to somehow identify the application. But it's Kubernetes, so we anyway have our own custom resource definition for applications. So we have ID on a custom resource level. We don't need to have it in the spec itself. So anyway, we would just generate something there if that would be mandatory.
That makes sense, yeah. So and also to add that to that is in the case of testing of this is something that I've been exploring lately. how an API testing solution or API, I'm like API, you know, I'm not sure if we should call it API anymore because it has many meanings now, but probably event-driven architecture testing solution. If you want to create something out of the box, like really or on the fly, let's say, then the idea doesn't make much sense, right? So because it's something like generated and doesn't really have a meaning. So I don't know if any of you have any thoughts on this, on the application ID, if it should remain mandatory because for you is something that you want to keep it there. Any of you have any concerns about it?
I would say it seems fine to make it optional.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with Scott.
Okay, so I think Rubén is not saying anything today. Saying, don't be shy, man. Just cool. So I think yeah, I think we'll make it optional in the next version and then release candidate version and see how it goes. In any case, we don't have much time for reviews here because the next point on today's agenda is exactly about this, about dates, and because the spec involves a lot of work in tooling and you know and the ecosystem around it. We wanted to make sure that we have at least a good enough spec for version 2 that we can use it for many time, right? And then we can keep evolving it over time. And we don't have to make the best spec right now for version 2. Just as I said, good enough. So thinking about it a lot, I was thinking, and you can tell me what you think about it, but I was thinking on putting the 1st of July as a deadline for reviews. So whatever is on the July 1st on version 2, except minor fixes, it's going to be the version 2, basically, the definitive one. And so the reason I'm keeping it to July 1st is because I want to launch it on version 2 on September, late September if possible. So I need some time to update the whole. I mean, I and you, the ones using AsyncAPI in your products, you need some time to update to version 2, and you don't want to be updating your products to version 2 release candidate X, right? And then knowing that this is going to break at some point. So yeah, I think after many meetings with you and other people, and you know, with the community and talking about it with the people, I think version 2 might be in a good shape to continue with this as it is. As I said, with minor fixes. If after 1st of July we see something like, okay, this is crazy, like it should not be like this, of course we're not gonna ship it with a mistake there, but yeah, I'll close the review period so we can make it stable at least for tooling development. Does that sound to you? Do you think it's okay for you today? So you need more time for reviews, or you think I'm taking a lot of time? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Okay.
I'm done with review, so for me deadline can be tomorrow. So.
Okay. Yeah, but you are very biased. You and Scott, who already did the review, is like, no. don't wait so much. Cool. So I'm happy Dan that we can stick to these dates now, and everything's gonna be easier from now on, because the spec will remain untouched or mostly untouched until September, late September, October. So yeah. Yeah.
Can you? So I had some connection issues. So I've heard the deadline for the feedback. It's 1st of July, and the other dates, because you're saying dates. Did you say something? Did you mention some other dates?
Late September.
Late September would be the announcement of the
launch. The
launch.
The announcement.
Official. Yeah.
Actually, I mean, between us, we can already. I mean, I'll release the spec. I'll make the final version 2 before, really before that. But yeah, the announcement, the official announcement, going to an event and and announcing it properly and all this stuff will be on late September. So, and yeah, and this requires a lot of staff, not just the spec and the tooling, but also generating some marketing content and some content as well, some updating the documentation and creating tutorials and but the spec can be on final version 2 from probably on July 1st or July 2nd, right? So it's safe for everyone to say, okay, I can now start updating my product with a new version, and also it will be easier for tooling development as well.
Okay, cool. Then it's perfect, because I planned with my guys to start working on some services July. Then it's gonna be perfect. Okay, cool.
Sounds good. Perfect. So any other things that are not in the agenda today? I mean, just feel free to raise any question now or after the meeting. I'm happy.
So I have one question,
yeah,
which is a bit embarrassing, I think. So I was going through all the getting started guides you prepared for 2.0, and I have small concern. I think me personally, I think I made a mistake when I started using AsyncAPI 1.0. I think I misunderstood pretty important things. So looking at the channels now, you can have or the topics in the past, you can have subscribe or publish. And for 1.0, when we started using it, I modeled in the way I understood the spec as a reader, as a consumer. So I was when we started modeling the spec, I said, okay, when we know we can subscribe to something from this application, then in the spec we should specify, okay, subscribe. And damn it, I think it's the opposite, right?
Exactly. This has changed. The semantics at the point of view of the verb has changed, and this has been, I don't know, probably I would regret in the future or not. I don't know. The thing is that for client server architectures, that was the best point of view. The one from the first version and from OpenAPI, for instance. So you see it from the consumer perspective, like in OpenAPI, you can get or you can post, right? You can publish or you can subscribe, right? From the consumer perspective. But given that AsyncAPI is mostly used on broker-centric architectures, this was highly confusing. Right? For people, it was really, really confusing. Like, okay, it says publish and subscribe, but people actually were thinking on this actually means that your application is publishing or is subscribing to the broker, right, in this channel. So why I decided to change it is because most of the use cases, as I said, are related to broker-centric architectures and not so much about client server. and both are fine. To be honest, like both are correct. In the case of if you look at it from the consumer side, in broker-centric architectures, it can be highly confusing. But then, yeah. So
okay, so the answer is actually better than I thought. So I wasn't wrong last year. It's just now the change happened. So actually, last year when I understood it in the way that I was reading it as a consumer, it was correct, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, then it's perfect. Okay, so that's oh fuck, it's so awesome. Thank you. Because it's we anyway. So the thing is that for me it would be a problem if it's just a design problem that happened on my side, because I'm not sure yet how we would solve it. But if it's because the spec is changing, then in our case anyway, we don't want to now force all the owners of the applications to now start generating AsyncAPI 2.0. We anyway will want to transparently support them, so they don't even have to really do any changes. We will have a converter that will automatically always convert to the latest version. Actually, so for me, it's not a problem then, because I will anyway convert it.
Actually, if you go, let me double check that. It was in my plans. I don't know if I did it in the end. If you go to the Node.js package that I created to convert from 1 to 2, it already makes a change. Like if you have subscribed, it changes for published. So, and the other way around. So,
I mean, from 2.0, it totally makes sense because you describe applications, so you then create document from the source point of view, like publisher and not the subscriber.
And that works for both cases, also for client server. It's just that for the client server model, we're not used to that. We're used to model it as from the consumer point of view, from the client point of view, right? But in this way, you can model both broker-centric architectures and client server. So the other way around, it will be very, very weird for broker-centric architectures, which happens to be the biggest use case for AsyncAPI. So yeah, you were right.
Oof,
that's a good message for Monday, for Tuesday.
So, Fran, it seems that you may. So one challenge you have there is, first of all, I agree completely with the approach you've taken. You have to pick one. So try to pick one that makes sense for event driven. A bit of the challenge you've had with aligning that with OpenAPI is the fact that OpenAPI has get, put, post, etc., which are operations. Maybe you'd be better off with roles than with operations, right? Because then it's more clear I'm a subscriber versus you can subscribe, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, the meaning, I think Jonathan Schabowski updated that on the spec, but I think on the verb, on the operation verb, on publish and subscribe, it says it clearly, like it means that this application can publish in this channel this message. Not can publish, it's gonna publish. It's going to publish eventually, not pun intended. It's gonna publish this event, right? This message. So yeah, it's, I think, well, the biggest problem that I found with AsyncAPI so far, it hasn't been tooling or the spec or anything. It has been mindset. Like explaining and shifting the mindset on people really, it's really hard because people are so used to client server model that suddenly you have to blame brokers, and it's like, what?
And there are, and the problem is there's many degrees of freedom in the event-driven world, right? And
too many. Too many, yeah. And hopefully we can help document them or define them so they are still free, but well defined, at least. Cool, folks. So I have to jump into another meeting now. As I said, if you have any concerns or any thoughts that you just want to share, I'm happy to chat at any time, any Central Europe time, right? And well, Central Europe summertime. I did this mistake yesterday with Lucas. So yeah, feel free to reach me, and I'll be happy to chat. Yeah, thanks for joining today, and see you soon.
Thanks, Fran. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Bye.